Foster's. It's Australian for beer.
But I got somebody here today just to let you know that there's still soul inside. The soul to make you walk right. Soul to make you talk right. Soul to make you treat your family right. I'm talking about that soul that's deep down inside.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Say yeah. Oh, I can hear you say yeah.
Oh, Foster's. Okay. Let's get started. This is WNDC. WNDC stands for We in the Crib and You Ain't. NDC. WNDC, NDC. Basically speaking, there's a lot on my mind. Go figure. And we've dealt with a lot. We've got this trending drama with the Jacksons, if you're nasty. We've got the current fame and whatnot from Mr. Samuels, who's really handling some good things out there on the whole internet kind of entertainment environment. And then there's me. I'm fairly new. And for that reason, I ask that you subscribe, add, share, and if you can, donate. You know, we're still dealing with this COVID situation. And, you know, this is something that I've been intending on doing due to the mere fact that I've got so much time on my hands and so much to talk about and so little directions other than here to actually talk to. And so I guess you're it, tag. Now, all of my subjects revolve around people of color. Black folks, people of color. And where we are today. And I think where I want to go with this first is our history. You know, we come a long way. We come a long way, babies. We've survived slavery. We've up and come. And right at the point of Reconstruction, we were at a high point until the propaganda kicked in. The early 1900s started a lot of the Devine 9 and Talented 10. Started a lot of the reasons why we needed HBCUs. And these things were very important, especially being that during that time, here we were, you know, growing out of or into this emancipated kind of reality as people of color in this country. And yet the biggest farce that was been put on us is just due to the mere fact that when they decided to put the order out to emancipate all people of color, all enslaved people, what they didn't do is prepare them for what freedom really means. And therefore, we've found ourselves in this kind of awkward state due to the mere fact that at best what we had was during the earlier portions of that whole reconstruction, we had HBCUs and our Greek organizations and things of that nature. And these things were structured for what they believed to be the talented, the divine, and the expected people of color whom are destined for greatness. Due to the mere fact that even as Carter G. Wilson once spoke about the need to, re-educate or to enhance and enlighten our people of color, but also the Americans. And therefore, that's the reason why we ended up with a Black History Month, which was then a day. And what stands out the most about that era is the mere fact that if it wasn't for the HBCUs and the Devines and whatnot, we would be worse shape. But truth be told, for many of you people of color that are out there watching or reading or whatever you're doing right now, without trying to slander or slant you or whatnot, just keep in mind that the way that our social class structure existed back in that early era, it was never expected for all of us to be in the game. While they had our best intentions in mind, our social structure, our class structure and whatnot, invented things like the boule and even our Masonic orders and whatnot were basically structured around elitism. Doing that area, you have to realize that as a gentleman once put it, the problem is that they emancipated everybody, and they emancipated millions, thousands of ignorant, uneducated, unstructured, untrained people of color and enslaved people. And thank God that we've actually gotten to this point where, while we still are screaming out the same things we were doing then as far as what Black Lives Matter, and people are still not getting it. The reason is that we were not afforded a complete kind of mentorship. And therefore, as people of color, we structured our communities and whatnot in a manner where we were very reserved. We were very conservative in nature. We looked after each other. We kept things in our community. We, unlike a lot of the other races of people, found ourselves with the need to basically just, take care of our own and keep it down. And a lot of the people earlier in the times that were more upper metaphysically educated became the people that were bequeathed to be the curators of our evolution and existence. And that worked out just well for a few decades. But what happened is, all of a sudden, all bets were off. We got to that area where all of a sudden, here we were going from the 40s into the 50s and the 50s into the early 60s. And at that point, the fix was in. And at that point, while we were struggling for our civil rights and things of that nature, they were trying to prevent a lot of us from the militant movement that we had started to grow into. And as a sidebar, as we face many of the struggles today with many of these criminal acts of mass murder and hate crimes, please be advised that it's always been about raising and uplifting those whom have been emancipated without any structure. Had we had it, most of you people would have been in better shape, as well as many of us. but it was never intended for the generalized Negro to actually be expected or being allowed to evolve into movers and shakers and whatnot. And yet, that's where the Divine Nine and the Talented Ten and the Masonic Prince Hall orders and whatnot were most useful at a time when we were in the process of that. And yet, we know now that, the NAACP was not necessarily intended for all black folks either. It wasn't the black thing. It was the people of color. And people of color is very intricate because, see, we've grown to this point without the understanding that for many of us, if you were of slave heritage where you had no recollection of where you came from, you didn't have a structure of pride and protocol, due to the mere fact that all you knew was that you were a slave and now you're free. Where there were many others that held on to their culture and whatnot, that we would call them, now immigrants and whatnot, just like all the other immigrants and whatnot that came, and while they existed with all of the other emancipated people of color, they had a certain kind of protocol, a certain kind of action where they decided to look after their people, but keep them at bay. And so, as we grew into our movement of civil rights and whatnot, a lot of the pomp and circumstances of this upper metaphysical group of elite people of color slowly started to filter into what now we're in a state of all bets are off. The Mayans entitled this era, this whole age of Aquarius era that we're now into, as the end of all things. Now, that's very important, and I'd like for you to really understand where I'm going with this end of all things. While the structure of our elite upper metaphysical people of color was very important to our growth, our history was still riddled with the subgroups of racism, elitism, and things of that nature. We, if you were really into your history, then recall the big beef, the big drama between W.B. Du Bois, the light-skinned Negro that was militant, and the what's his name, the Peanut Man, Washington Carver, dark-skinned boule mentality person who had no belief that all Negroes are predestined to be deserving of the same privilege as a lot of the more elite generations and whatnot were expected to be. And so here we are, and we're in a whole new state. Now all bets are off. It's the end of all things, and that's the end of all things for people of color. Most importantly, due to the mere fact that now we don't have as many of the struggles, the cultural subgroup cultures of, the people from the West Indies, forbidding their generations to intertwine or marry with Jamaicans or Africans or, things of that nature. You have people from Africa that, that forbid their kids from, you're from Kenya, you're from Nigeria, this, that, and the other. I never forgot the lesson that I learned in traveling, where I found that they had a word for in Africa for the type of people that I'm speaking of, that many of us are connected to, and they were bush people. Now, I couldn't figure out how they could figure out how to tell the difference between, an upstanding African black person and a bush person, but they did. That same kind of joke that Chris Rock told when he spoke about how white folks can't stand niggas. And, black folks can't stand niggas too. And they had no idea of the reference for that because, see, we've held a certain level of prestige, a certain level of class, a certain level of expectations as to how we are to socially conduct ourselves. And all those who fell short were considered the insignificant people they would actually define as niggas, as the ghetto people, as the insignificant people of color. And they were to believe that they were to inherit the progress that would, be, allowed and come to people of color as we evolve. And yet we're at the end of all things. And just like the era of the emancipation, where we found ourselves kind of struggling with the reality that many of the things that happened to us in that era were due to the mere fact that we just were so ignorant that we didn't see it coming. We didn't know it. We just didn't know no better. We had no ability to be able to unite and whatnot in masses because most of the upper metaphysical people that were in power, in control, the Black Wall Streets and things of that nature, the Boulets, the HBCU types, the talented tens and the Masons and whatnot of color, held a certain kind of precedence where, their secrecy was held in the mere fact that they are not just your average ignorant people of color, and yet their responsibility was to take care of their flock as people of color or shepherds, you would say. And it was never expected for us to be in a state that we are now, where it's the end of all things. And for people of color right now today, we are struggling with a lot of this reality that we cannot find answers to because we're not capable of being able to look back and really see this from a broader view. For the hundreds of people of color that during the emancipation, they were not necessarily even enslaved. And so when it came out like that, then they built the HBCUs and things like that. And it was a mandatory kind of need for us to uplift the race. And yet the race was basically perceived with a set of conditions that, became kind of mutilated, later on, like during the era where, we found ourselves in certain social classes where we would identify each other, by things like the brown paper bag test. The light-skinned black folks and were considered more elite than the dark skin, and the conditions that came behind the dark skinned ones is only the dark skinned ones that actually had a certain kind of royalty, a certain kind of precedence, a certain kind of lineage that did not include the colonial slave history or existence. Did we exist? And we basically conditioned ourselves to basically understand that, certain things are only reserved for certain people. I recall back in my high school days, there was this one girl that wanted me to take her to her prom. And it mirrored pretty much oh man, I'm messing up. It mirrored the show, The Good Times episode where JJ had met the little girl in high school and she wanted him to take her to the prom and also to her cotillion. And their parents came to meet their parents, and basically, they were on what initially seemed like an equal kind of level of existence until they brought up the mere fact that they were a certain people of a certain class, even though They stayed in the projects just like JJ and all this other stuff. Uh, they truly believed and existed and basically prescribed to a certain kind of conduct where, it's not where you're at, it's who you are. And for a lot of those people, that episode kind of brought out the condition, the conundrum that has basically, bless me, that brought out the reality that that subculture existed by way of them stating that JJ and his family was not qualified. I'll just use that word to attend or to assist her. God damn, my vocabulary is slipping. He could not escort her to the cotillion, and they couldn't understand that. They got real. James got real up in his feelings about what you mean. My son can't take your daughter out there, man. You come from the same place we come from. And they said, look. And that episode really hurt a lot of people. It really messed with a lot of people's heads because even during that era, it was explaining this kind of subculture that we're still in the presence of trying to emancipate ourselves as a whole now. And what complicates a lot of these things is due to the mere fact that when it was structured back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was a thing of pride. People were inheriting, and one day, son, you will be, the shepherd to this flock, and you'll this, that, and the other, and you are not just a regular Negro. Don't you let nobody try to tell you that you are insignificant. You come from good stock. You come from a good bloodline. You are not an ignorant Negro. And they had been raised to deal with that. So as people, and those people, the Boulay and whatnot, evolved into their little classism and whatnot. The expectations and the conditions into which we, as people of color, unknowingly had structured ourselves was in a manner where the same racist instinct that we complain about with other non-people of color that seems to be driven by the "not my daughter" was just as prevalent in our own communities. And that's where that episode and my little story of how, this girl wanted me to take her to her cotillion and her prom just because I was a pretty boy. I was a pretty boy. I looked good in the suit and the whole nine. And I've been to 8 proms due to the mere fact that, word got out that, we make really good pictures and whatnot. And so she brought me home and her mother was there, and her mother did that social kind of thing where, she brought me over and she said, baby, go make us some tea. And that's kind of like the international Southern or class kind of statement that respectful women would say when they wanted to have a moment. And we sat there and she read me the riot act. She said, where's your family from? Who went to school? What school you went to? Where's this, that, and the other, and things of that nature. And without basically making me feel as if the questions that were being asked may affect my image, initially. By the time that old girl came back with the tea, her mom politely, now they were from the islands. I'm not sure which one of the islands they were from, but they were really one of those educated kind of, even though they was blue black, they were the educated kind of people, and some black folks will understand what I'm saying when you're out and you're hanging with your people and then you go back to meet your family and whatnot. And as you go into the house with them and whole nine, and y'all speak the street lingo and y'all tighten this, that, and the other, and you go over to the house and then you realize you're the only one in the house with that doesn't have an accent. Now, and yet a lot of the criteria that we had as people of color was based on that riot act, that who's who, that where you come from, who you with, who's your family, where'd y'all this, that, and other, where'd you go to school, things of that nature. And for a lot of today's people, that might seem kind of odd that it was that distinct, but it was. That's kind of the mentality that a lot of people got up in their feelings about when Bill Cosby kind of, went off and kind of stated, those people out there on the street and this, that, and the other, and they're like, Bill, Mr. Bill Cosby, Mr. Hey, I thought you was down with us and you talking down to us. And for a lot of us, people of color, many of us can recall a time and an era where our own people, those people, would make it very adamant and clear in a manner that, while it never came with any answers then, the answers now are, when they would say, you're not going to be something. I went to high school. I had this counselor. Her name was Mrs. Dones or something like that. Little high chick with bad breath. Oh, anywho, so she's supposed to be my high school career counselor. So here I was in high school, and I wasn't a bad student. As a matter of fact, prior to us moving to Georgia, I was born in Pittsburgh. And my parents owned the first black bookstore and community center during the early 60s to almost the early 70s. And so we were very adamant in the civil rights movement. And I was a prodigy child. I've, basically been known because I was aware or known of practically all the books in the bookstore. And so my parents also being very adamant in the whole college scene and, and the whole social civil rights thing and whatnot, found that I was a part of that attraction of sorts. I was the little man. And they always found me very interesting that I actually was aware of many of the subjects and whatnot that many of them at that time were actually studying in school. And my perspectives were very enlightening enough that I was not basically shunned as due to my age. And I even found myself at a point in time when I finally went to school. They put me in kindergarten. Excuse me. And I gave my teachers hell because I didn't really want to be in, but only to find out that when I took the nationalized test, I was on a 5th and 7th grade level reading and math at the beginning of kindergarten. And so they didn't flunk me, but they wanted to. And so the best that they can do in public school for a little black sadistic boy is to send him to first grade. And, that didn't help me any, because today, in today's society now, with a child that had that kind of intelligence at that time, that tested that level, they would have been allowed to actually not just go to the next grade, but they would actually been allowed to advance. And so today is the first time and era that we actually now see people of color, our children, being allowed to advance in their educational journey. And so we've got kids that are going from fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh grade to college and things of that nature. Prior to that, we'd only saw that with, certain other, foreign people, Chinese and all these other people that would actually culture their people. But, for many of us, of people of color today, a lot of us don't recall how adamant and how invested we were into the arts, into education and history and language and things of that nature. I spoke more languages than I remember now back then. And it was very rare. And it didn't help any that I was and have always been this little sadistic black child, male child. And I would often have to deal with a lot of the common people in my own culture and race that would basically assume my image to be nothing more than what's your badass? You're this, that, and other. I got kicked out of school. Never forget, I got kicked out of school because we had to write a report about what we did on our time off during a certain break. And I basically told them that I was out on a plane and we went to the West Coast and then we went to the Midwest and we came back here. And, and I said, and we were on a plane. Now, this is in the early mid 60s. And the teacher looked at me and she said, "You little lying ass bastard, you get out of my classroom and you get out of the school." And she kicked me out of school and she said, "Don't you come back unless you bring your parents with you, because ain't no damn way in the world that your little black butt, been on no damn plane." Even while I was sitting at the desk with this collectible kids Pan Am little light blue little bag, little tote bag that my parents had a fit for actually coming out of their pocket for. But the backstory for that trip actually existed to the mere fact that, unbeknownst to them, while she was just in the mindset of going, "Your little black ghetto sadistic butt, ain't been on no doggone plane," and I'm sitting back there, and so I got sent home and my parents sat back and they were like, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Well, they kicked me out of school." And they said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I told them that we went on a trip and we've been to the West Coast and we've been to the Midwest and then we're back here and we took a plane." And they were like, "And what?" And she said, "I was lying bastard, and to get out and walk home on my own unescorted and tell my parents that I'm not allowed back into school, kindergarten, until I bring my parents back to explain why my lying black sadistic ghetto ass is trying to talk about being on the plane." Because during that era, not too many people took planes, but we did. And we did often. And we traveled often because we were active in the civil rights movement. She didn't know who my parents were. She didn't care. All she knew is that she couldn't stand my little sadistic black butt and had no idea that my my attitude was due to the mere fact that I was in kindergarten with a 5th and 7th grade level reading and math. And basically speaking, I was damn near ordained in some aspects. And yet, my parents came back and they said, "Look, lady, I don't know why you sent my son home, but I'm bringing him back because we expect for you to take care of him so we can get some things done, because my little ADHD and HD type self was already enough in itself." And In many cases, school was a break for my parents. And so, um, and she's like, well, she took a plane and I'll never forget my pops going off on her to the point where she sat back and said, we did. And she looked at him like, oh, and she's like, oh, you didn't even notice that he's got the doggone Pan Am bag. And he really was pissed off about that because my pops didn't have the loot. But I wanted that bag. I saw all the white kids with one. I wanted one. TWA back in that era only had 2 collectible things that all the kids wanted that were exposed to the whole airline experience. One was a model plane, and the other one was the tote bag. And I got a tote bag. And so he's like, look, don't you be kicking my kid out on the street anymore about all this. He's not lying. He was told the truth. Now, the back end of that story was that we were also involved into the civil rights movement. It also, that trip in particular, was from the West Coast to the Midwest. We were in Detroit. We were not just in Detroit, but that weekend and that time that we were in Detroit. Also, we were in Detroit for a Black Power, Panther, civil rights meeting that was being held in Aretha Franklin's father's church. This is the same very meeting that also was known and has been known to have been the incident into which there was a shootout. That today, when you take the tour of Aretha Franklin's church, they still show you the bullet holes in the wall and whatnot that still remind us of that night and whatnot. Now, I had more memories of it, but my mom had even more memories. And that night was something else. And yes, it's the same night that Mr. Secure was arrested under the belief that he killed one of the federal agents. The only person that was actually killed in that melee. And yet they let him go several years later after they couldn't prove that it was him. And yet the reality was, I've heard my mother sit back and recall how they treated us, how, they stood us out there. They opened up the doors and the windows and it was cold and they had us there. And then they took us to jail and they put the women and the children together and they put the men in a whole nother place. And basically they just, kind of slid us on out of there. And next thing you know, we're back home. And I told the teacher, I was on a plane. I didn't have to say anything about a shootout. I didn't have to say anything about going to jail. I didn't have anything about, us being very intricate in the civil rights movement. And yet all this woman of color could think about was the mere fact that my little ghetto black sadistic butt know damn well that I can't afford to be on a plane, ain't been around there, had no idea my intelligence that was only found out after they had already flunked me in kindergarten, only to find out that, oh my God, we can't put him in the 5th or 7th grade, even though he has a 5th and 7th grade reading math. So what they do, they put me in kindergarten and they put me in 1st grade. And that was terrible. Because that's when ABCs and C Dick run, C Spot, C Jane. And I was a mess. I was always a mess, always in school. I really honestly would give it to him because I was a bright, intelligent kid that nobody ever considered may just not be equipped to be at that level when I should be on a level of preparedness of greatness. And due to the mere fact that my parents and my family were not one of the elite type people culturally or socially, we were not one of those lodges or orders or frats or blue bloods or boule or anything of the nature. So our existence still mattered, and yet we were I was not necessarily connected and have never been connected. I've never had to join a lodge or this, that, and the other. And I found that the most uncomfortable thing that I've had to realize is at a certain point in time where I sat in the room here in Washington, D.C. for the Black Caucus. And for the first time in my career, as a stagehand and a tech. I sat in a room and I was totally amazed. I did 25 years prior in my career, all down south, where I had grown to accept the mere fact that it's more likely that I'll be that one person of color on a gig that's doing something more than just lifting. And so here I am in a room with all people of color, and I considered them all black people, like people who come to DC, excuse me, who come to DC and believe that Chocolate City is black, blackity black, this, that, and the other, and have no idea that it might look black from the outside in, because that's what we are conditioned to believe is just that one unified thing. But here is very intricate, because blacks are the only people of color that have no embassy, have no one direct place to connect to a existence of history. And yet, on any given day, you can stand in a crowd full of black folks and not realize, as I did in that event, where I'm sitting there and I'm having a fit. I'm telling people, man, this is like coming to the promised land, and this, that, and the other. And everybody's looking at me like, who is this guy? And where did he come from? Who knows this guy? Who's his parents? This, that, and the other. And I didn't even use, one of the mistakes that I probably made is I didn't use my parents' lineage or anything of that nature. I walked in blind off my hellified resume. And at that moment, it became very clear that I was the only person in that room that did not have a pedigree, did not have an accent, did not belong to any person's country or frat or fraternity or boule or anything of that nature. And for that reason, for the next 4 years of my existence here, none of the other white folks in my local could understand why it was that, I, unlike many other people of color, were not in the good graces of the structure of people of color whom took care of their own. And there's like, why can't you get work with those people? And I kept trying to tell them, because I'm not one of those people. And to this day, most people of non-color cannot understand when someone like myself says, no offense, but I'm an un-Negro. I'm one of those kind of people that a lot of the other people who grow into these things and their families are structured in a way where, due to the mere fact of their associations and whatnot, their children or whatnot are privileged to be accepted and looked out for. And due to that, who's your parents? It's not what you know, it's who you know. And I fought through that. And regardless of how anyone else might think it felt enlightening. It felt enhancing. I did it because I didn't do it off the back of my own people. I didn't say, look out for me, because there were none. I was not a part of them. I've lived my life having to understand that even though I should qualify, and many of the people that I've befriended that I still know to today have all been invited, enlightened, and introduced to different various structures. Their frats and their masons and their Soros and their elks and their what's the other guy with the fez? The Shriners and all these other things like that. And yet none of those things. And it's caused a certain conflict at a certain point in time as in our growth as we were growing up, where even though I was one of the included people of color that was moving and shaking and assisting and building a lot of what people, brag about and look to as an accomplishment that we did as people of color. Many of them found themselves in the same situation that little girl in high school had to find when her mom came to her and said, oh, you can't be hanging out with that boy. You can't take him to he can't take you to Cotillion, and And yet it wasn't like I didn't know how to ballroom dance. I didn't know how, I didn't know the music. I didn't know the protocol and things of that nature, but I was never structured or into any kind of structure where they conditioned you to be there. Now, fast forward to where we are today. Now, in the process of all of that, somehow around the 50s, going into the 60s and whatnot, also became a time where even that protocol and whatnot started to lose its luster. And so you would think that there would be more people of color that have been educated and groomed on the social graces into which the older generations, saw as a privilege. And to be good black people, to be smart black people, to not be your average Negro. And yet, sitting back and I was listening to this Samuels dude, Kevin Samuels or whatnot. And he was talking to this one little girl, and she was talking about how, she's a Delta, and, she's living in Hartford, Connecticut. And, she comes from a very prestigious family where her mother was a Delta and her father was a Kappa, and they went to good schools, and he was a professor and all this other stuff like that. And she'd been groomed to be that uppity Negro type thing that, many people believe that they are aware of, but not necessarily aware of the level that they were in. And just no more than the little girl who wanted me to take her to the cotillion found out, just like JJ, I'm not one of them peoples. And it's even worse now because, see, also during that 40s and 50s era, we also found ourselves in a state where, as we were evolving, and everybody was tuning in and tuning out, everybody was, taking advantage of these new found freedoms and graces and whatnot. They left a lot of the new generations out of the loop. The same structure that was so important for the earlier founders of the Devines and the Talenteds and the HBCUs and the Boulets and the Masons and the Stars and all those other things for people of color, kind of slid off by the wayside. And so we found ourselves being neglected in our provisions that our family dynamics existed back in that era. Back in the 40s and 50s and whatnot, the census actually stated that excuse me, black people of color as a whole were the most partnered, the most married, the most structured. Our family dynamic was the most solid, structured of all races during the late 50s. And then here came the 60s, and here came the civil rights thing, and here came those Dixiecrats whom, didn't like nobody, didn't like the Republicans or the Democrats. And keep in mind that during that era of time, we were just coming about in our voting strength and whatnot. And yet, most people who try to get into politics can't even understand how the Republican Party was our party. It was the Union Party. That party had more people of color that were in Congress and whatnot, all the way back to the formation, literally, even before Reconstruction. And yet, when Lincoln existed, the Party of Lincoln, that little group of people that, that were the Party of Lincoln, was black. Now you can't find any of the members of that Lincoln Republican group that has any black, any color in them. Everything got, and we have to, blame Kennedy for that one too. They were so up in their feelings about this Kennedy people and whatnot going out there that when we basically formed what was then understood as the black vote. For the first time, we became the dominant part of the political realm, to a point where we were what helped Kennedy win. And they were so up in their feelings about that Mr. Lyndon B. Johnson said, when I get finished with these people, he said, we have to do something about this because it's the right thing and this, that, and the other. It's getting to a point where, we got to give them something. So we're going to give them something, not enough to matter, but just enough to keep them at peace, appeased. And when I'm done with them, they'll be voting for the next 200 years, Democrat, and not even know it. And here we are, just 20, 30 years, 40 years ago, now in a state where we can't even understand how we basically were Republicans. We can't even see how, that party has anything to do with us. It was ours before it was theirs. We can't even see how that was. None of us even have the ability to identify Dixiecrats. But I digress back to the topic, because what we have here today is this struggle. So as I listen to this other podcast where, this elitist, well-to-do female, that came from a well-to-do family and whatnot, is, talking about how she, is, and all of her friends, all of the people in her sorority and whatnot, were all single. And they were like, we just can't find it. And this, that, and the other. And the major one reason why it's been so difficult for many of them is the same reason why old dude would cut into a whole bunch of people who would, get on their show talking about how, they rate themselves as a 10, and they think that they should be able to deserve a six-figure man and things of that nature. And yet the issue that we're dealing with as people of color is somewhat just the same way that Harry and Meghan is dealing with and has been dealing with the royal family. And it goes back to the mere fact that while Meghan's mother, raised her in a manner where, it wasn't the black experience. She wasn't a debutante. So when she got to the castle and they told her, you're going to have to curtsy, you're going to have to know some of these protocols and things of that nature, she really honestly freaked out to the point where she even admitted that she was so lost that she even felt like killing herself because she was ill-equipped. And this is something that was the intention of many of the people of color back during the Reconstruction in the early 90s and the early 1900s and the late 1800s, where they felt the need to prepare certain elitist type people to be able to handle the level of prestige and classism and whatnot that exists in that realm. And so more and more now in our new generations, we rarely run into somebody who's a debutante. We rarely run into someone who knows how to formally dance or knows how to lead or knows how to wear a dress or wear a skirt. We don't know what it means to be a gentleman because we've had no gentleman. We've been raised by generations of neglected people who have no idea of the pomp and circumstance that was once reserved for just the rare amount of people of color that were expected to inherit this level of life that we now all are privileged to exist in. And therefore, we're back into that same state of being as we were when Lincoln freed all the slaves. And the biggest problem was, they couldn't even spell free, didn't know how to write, couldn't figure out anything, had no idea freedom is free, had all these other things. And that's what caused, and that's what's still causing the post-traumatic slave syndrome that Dr. Joyce DeCry speaks of, that exists in all of us to some extent, just due to the mere fact that we're just ill-equipped to understand how the need for us to be more equipped for us to be more aware, to us to be more conditioned into a state of what class is, what that level is. We want to be managers and this, that, and the other, and and then want to complain. Why can't we be CEOs and things? You haven't been. There used to be a book called the Executive Secretary's Handbook or Manual, and in it basically was the holy grail of how to assist the CEO top level this, that, and the other of business and whatnot. The same very place that they were there, and how the upper class non-people of color and whatnot had a tradition of training their kids to be prepared to handle that level of life, and more and more of us didn't. And so when people would complain, why is it that as soon as a man make a money, or as soon as a woman this, that, and the other, they go out and they get themselves a white person or this, that, and the other, and we can't have nothing, they this, that, and the other. And yet I've been to many, and I've seen and I've heard of many of the courses that they would give entry level people going to the next level, like sports people, where they sit back and they say, well, it's kind of like a scene from when Will Smith played in Ali, where they said, brother Ali, I know you like this woman, but she's the kind of woman that you can have, but she's not the kind of woman that you should marry. And he got up in his feelings because he couldn't understand that, because his greatness came without the support of the understanding of what classism was and why that was existing. Of course, that resulted in his first marriage, and yet here I am, and we're talking about the Jackson saga or whatnot, and people are sitting back there and they're oh man, this, that, and the other. And I'm like, they are the same epiphany of the same kind of deficit that exists, in the mere fact that both what's his name, Derek, and his wife are literally, I would say, ill prepared. I believe they were ill prepared for the level of society and responsibilities they had. People rarely get all the information and the training and whatnot in order for them to be more prepared to be parents, to be adults, to be married, to understand what that means. It's not just about bragging rights for your sexual indulgences. It's a partnership. And so the difference between that expectation comes by way of something as simple as, I call it the Kobe Bryant move. Just like the white folks in that upper level corporate era. What do you do when you find out that your husband has been having an affair with his executive secretary? She says, nothing. I talk to him, I tell him you're busted, and the whole nine, knowing that the one thing that is totally damaging to our whole existence is the mere fact that once you go from manager to executive, you go to partner, then everything that you're structured with comes into play. That's the reason why people, are not, you can't be single and get up into the CEO level. Why? Because, everybody who says they want to earn six figures, once you start getting into that money level, the need for you to invest comes into play to such a degree where some of the funniest things that I would see is people who got to that point, and then all of a sudden, their tax attorney would come to them and say, well, you got two choices. If you don't want to pay back this boatload of money to your taxes, now that you're making six figures and then some, then you're going to have to rather do one of two things. You're either going to have to get married, have some kids or something, or buy a boat. And And a lot of people can't understand. They can't even phantom, the understanding of that. Most people are just happy to be getting this little $1,400 and whatnot, not even realizing that, this upper level that they want to get into requires you to be more of an investor. More than that, you want to be a millionaire. You can't be a millionaire and do nothing but spend your money and ball out of control and this, that, and the other. You have to, money begets money, more money, more problems. Well, most people are not quite equipped to understand and respect that more problems thing. So while there are many women of color that would love to grow up and become Oprah, they're not aware of, the conditions and whatnot into which she has, structured her whole financials and social and class position to a point where she just can't hang out like she used to. You can't, not that you grow up and grow out of the hood, but, we're stuck as a society today in this state of ignorance, of not even being aware that there's just certain things that you can't. Like my man Kevin was talking about to some people where they were sitting back and they were like, well, I'm making 6 figures and this, that, and the other. And I want a man, that has that and everything. And I'm going, yeah, but you're not equipped to be able to handle marrying into the Kennedy family. You're not equipped to marry into Harry and, and the royal family. You're not equipped for all of this. And yet you're not aware of the mere fact that even though you make a little money, you this, that, and the other, it doesn't matter, at a level of class and power, because you're not even aware of, the difference between a salad fork, a dinner fork, a dessert fork, or anything else like that, let alone, the subtle graces of that level of class. And in many cases, it's not your fault. Actually, there are generations of people, especially of color, that have not been capable of preparing you no more than we were capable of preparing all of the people of color and all the enslaved people back during the emancipation for the duty, the responsibility of being responsible, earning free people. You just can't just be free to just do anything willy-nilly. And that's the reason why many of us are not aware of why we keep catching so much hell, because that's all we want to do is party and bullshit and party. And we can't. We have to be responsible. Many of the people who want to complain about, I'm tired of being a slave. I'm like, yeah, but you're not ready to be a better slave master. You're not ready to be a better manager. You're not ready to be a CEO. You're not ready to handle a level of responsibility that comes with this power and whatnot. And in our relationships, I found it very awkward due to the fact I remember my pops pulled my collar one day and he said, son, I don't know where you got this ghetto fixation. And I almost got in my feelings when he said that. And I was like, explains, Pop. And he was like, we didn't raise you to be out here entertaining all of these common people or whatnot. And I was like, so what do you mean? He says, our expectations is that you would probably end up becoming a professor or whatnot. And you would probably marry, some, boule or maybe even a little white Jewish lady or something like that. And, and live in the educational realm of life and with the uppity ups and the muckety mucks. And, I thought you'd be like a professional artist or this, that, and the other. We didn't raise you to be a black, pimpish looking stagehand, that can't even get attention from many of these bottom feeders. And yet, one of my biggest difficulties in life has always been the mere fact that while people say you have to have something in common, I found it quite awkward that the level of education and enlightenment within my head was never basically matched or returned, in a way of speaking, and to mention that is the same way of like, I loved my neighborhoods and whatnot that I'd go to. And I never forget how I used to deal with a lot of the introductions into the hoods and whatnot. When people would be like, "Yo, man, what's up with this dude?" And it's like, "What? It's like, why is he talking white? Why does he pronunciating his words? Why is he using words that I don't understand?" Things of that nature. And in our culture, you know, intelligence is frowned upon. Being an uppity Negro is frowned upon, and therefore we have this clash between two worlds. We have the uppity Negroes who get into stardom and whatnot, and their white friends are like, "Man, I finally get a chance to meet one of y'all. Yo, my nigga." They're going, "Excuse me." That's the Carlton kind of syndrome that came out with the Fresh Prince kind of syndrome, and yet not being capable of explaining how today it's genetic. Today it's even worse because the images that people today are women. Our women want a six-figure man. They want somebody that they believe is worthy of them, and yet they are totally ill prepared to actually be able to respect a certain dynamic, forsaking all others. That is the most important thing. Once you have a structured, stable family dynamic, you become a asset. As long as you can filter all of the riches and whatnot in a structured manner where that money is being spent in a way that even the people who are giving it to you are paying you for it can brag upon how they have respectful, structured people. And yet, the majority of our people, when you tell them, "Oh, yo, man, if I catch them cheating, that's it. I'm done. I'm taking the kids and this, that, and the other. Forget the business and this, that, and the other." And you're sitting back and you're going, but that's not the way white folks got to where they're at, and yet nobody can teach us that because we still have religious things. And there's where the Jackson couple thing really is sitting up. And I question, where the hell are they getting their doggone mentorship from? What kind of churches or whatnot are giving that? Because they still seem, for all the money that they're supposed to be making and all the popularity, this, that, and the other, they really, I hate to say it, I hate to sound like an ignorant or a uppity Negro, but they so is ignorant. They have no class. No class. And that's a requirement that comes with all of the other things that many of us claim we want. And yet we can't get over the mere fact that half of the problem we have is finding or being with anyone else is that we're not utilizing that in our purpose, in our desire of trying to find equally yoked partners or things of that nature. Many people, they want to aspire to come up, but they don't aspire to come up, in a good manner. They don't aspire to come up and, "Oh, man, I can't wait till I make me some money so I can hang out in Vegas." I'm going, man, if I make me some money, I want to go to Monaco. I want to, forget, and we're not aware of the structure of life that exists at that level that we keep complaining that we so desire. And yet trying to find suitable mates has been at an all-time low for people of color, mostly due to the mere fact that as we've emancipated our women and they've achieved financial greatness and whatnot, they find themselves in a frustrated situation because they really, during this whole thing, believed that black men had the same kind of benefits that they had. And that's bullshit. That's not true. And yet we now have these generations of females that are very uncomfortable with any form of transparency due to the mere fact that while they want to be strong black women and mother of our children and this, that, and the other, they don't want the responsibility. They won't set a standard and a precedent because they're afraid that if they do, they'll be held accountable for it. And that's something that they don't want. They don't want, and to the audacity of any male to sit back and say, "You are not," it's so offensive to them that instead of it empower them to prove them wrong, they'll more likely lash out and improve them insignificant. You ain't gonna tell me nothing. Ain't no man gonna tell me this, that, and the other. And yet they want one, but nobody understands what a head of the household is. Nobody understands what a partner is. And now we've grown out of these gender roles. Now it's going to require us to have a partnership. We're not going to necessarily have it all down pack where that's your job, this is your job. No, this is our job. And yet, due to our culture and the things that we've experienced in our evolution, we're not cool with that. We just can't see that. We can't be down for that. And that's the reason why in many of the cases, many of the other people of color who basically just say, you know what, I can still be pro-black, but I'm going to find a reputable mate from another race. And everyone else goes, how dare you sell out, you this, that, and the other. And they're going, if I could found somebody that's as good as this woman. And yet part of that whole issue is just due to the mere fact that we're not raising good stock that is that's capable to hang with the muckety mucks. We just make them good enough to not come home, and not live up under us and not understand, that there's levels to this thing. And so I find it quite interesting. Now in my older state, I'm going to always be an old pimpish looking, hippie looking, dude that, most people would think, I can't even see you cleaning up. I remember I met this little lady up on Plenty of Fish, and she was hinting around about how, our conversations seem to be very enlightening, entertaining or whatnot. But all this time she's looking at all my little pictures on social media and this, that, and the other. She can't grasp it in her head. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, well, don't let the smooth taste fool you. I'm not, trash. I come from good stock. And, I know you might not be aware of it. And she's like, well, look, man, I can't even understand it. See, I got a good job and this, that, and the other. And sometimes I have to go to events and I just can't see myself having you accompany me to these events and whatnot. And I'm like, so what do you mean? And she's like, do you even own a tux? And technically speaking, prior to me losing a lot of things before I moved back up here to DC, yeah, I did own a tux. I rarely wore it, but, I own several good suits and whatnot, but, rarely wore it. But, you'd be surprised. It doesn't take much to clean up, more than they thought. But the big issue here was their fear that if they actually had me accompany them and walk me out into in company of their co-workers and supervisors and whatnot, that it would be a nightmare, and then everybody would ridicule them because, homie over there, he don't know much of nothing in this, that, and the other. And that's BS. Every doggone situation that I've had, and I've had plenty of them. I used to do a little side work for a little accounting firm called Arthur Young. And I used to remember how the partners in the firm would love themselves some me, and we would get down and we'd talk. And same thing when I was working with Coca-Cola, the media department. And while all of the workers, the executive workers, all this other stuff would kind of steer clear of me because I had my little fro. And even though I'm wearing, Hugo Boss and Yves Saint Laurent suits and Italian ties and stuff like that, I was still this homeboy, with a good suit. And, and yet I'm sitting here and, the vice president and, and all these other guys would be sitting back and we talking, we mucking him up. Yo, man, I used to remember back in the day, I used to be in the plant. Oh, man, they used to remember this, that, and other, blah, 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 blah. And yet all of their employees up under him would be looking like, man, he's setting us back. Look at him. I can't stand him. In fact, he just walk in and just pumping this, that, and the other. And, at the accounting firm, I'll never forget, there were only a couple of black people that were trying to earn their partnership up in there. And I remember one of the partners coming to me and he was like, hey, Hafiz, what's up with your, the people, man? I was talking with, a couple of our candidates, and they just seemed to not necessarily be comfortable with your image. They didn't go far enough in there, but they were like, why can't you be like him? And yet these are people that went to college and all this other stuff, and work their way all up to be almost ready to almost maybe earn partnership. And yet their bosses, the partners, the actual owners of this firm and whatnot are sitting there and having the audacity to say to them, why can't you be more like him? And I've had lots of instances like that in my life. And yet it's been quite awkward for me to explain that, not only to general friends, but to prospective possible mates. So going back to this lady from POC, Plenty of Fish. So she was sitting back and she was like, you know what? I think that I'm going to have to cut this off because, there's some things that I need to do. And I just don't think that you're the right fit for what I'm looking for. And so me as a stagehand and all that, I kind of mentioned to her, well, if it's a big event or something like that, 9 times out of 10, I'd rather be working it than attending it. But, I got a problem with that. I just ain't going to go get no Genghis, rent-a-tux. I'm not built for it. But so the next week came by and it was the inauguration. It was Obama's inauguration. And I get a call from the local and they're like, man, you got to get down here and go to work. They need you down there. And I was like, oh, well, fine. And so I go on down there, and I get in there and they happen to not tell me that it was dress blacks. They just said show blacks, and show blacks is basically what I got on, black shirt, maybe a, button up or something, and black pants or black shorts, and, where dress blacks are a suit all the way up to a tux of sorts. And so by the time that I got there, security was so bad that they were like, look, man, there's no time for me to send you back home and get, your suit and everything. So you're just here. We're going to work with this because we need you here. And so here I am, and I'm working one of the president dinner rooms and whatnot. And room we had like Stevie Wonder and Jamie Foxx and, several other big band type things and whatnot. And, and there were all of these people that were in attendance in their big ballroom, things, and their people in tuxes and everything just there, all happy to have gotten through security with their, their wonderful ticket, to actually be a part of this, inaugural ball. And yet, and so I'm walking by and I'm trying to, at this point, we're trying to deal with, we had matching stages. And on one stage, we'd have this group, and on the stage, we had this group. And sometimes the people on this side were kind of, not necessarily, they needed help. And so I'm the guy, I'm in my zone. I'm flashing by. There's a picture of it on Facebook. And in the process of it, when I'm in show mode, I forget that my image may be kind of awkward to most people. It's not awkward to the Secret Service. It's not awkward to the people behind there. I'm behind the barricade. And so after going backwards and forwards a couple of times, I happen to look over and I noticed that there's that girl. There's that woman. And she happened to have on her arm this tall, very nice looking, kind of cool white guy who, was, fitting per se. And so as I kind of caught her eye, she kind of tried to avoid looking because she was like, oh my God, and look at him, and he's just like, oh my God, look at him. And yet by the time that she noticed that her date, the white guy, kind of like Harry, was looking at me going, yo, look at Pippin. Look at him. He got his hair done. He's just stroking, man. And the Secret Service ain't even messing with him, man. Yo, get it on, man. And at that moment, I realized that the most awkward thing for her was the mere fact that while she made her choice in whom she felt was the standard into which she wanted to be associated with and at her level of society, had it gotten to a point where he got his wish and we would have met, the look on her face, let alone the situation would have been real awkward, just due to the mere fact that, one of the things that our sisters, uh, are really suffering from is this image into which they expect for us to basically be in a state in order for us to accompany them in their found structure, where at no point do many of them feel that we could be just as impressive no matter what we wore. I mean, I've had times that I would escort people or go to an event, and yeah, I might be wearing, a nice suit and this, that, and the other, but I might throw on some Jordans. And people are like, oh man, I can't believe you're gonna be up in there. And in the midst of all of that, I'm going to their doggone company dinner or whatnot, and and she's sitting back there just thinking, oh man, this has got to be the worst moment ever. And at the end of the night and by the next day or whatnot, all of her coworkers and even her supervisors or whatnot are stopping by her desk and wondering, hey, how's our feast doing, man? Where's your man? You gonna hang him out, man? Is he coming out to this, that, and the other? And at this point, they'd already been at, off with your head. And now they're at a point of going, I can't even, how do I explain to them that I thought that it was an embarrassment and I hadn't even noticed that this dude actually enhanced and accentuated my being to the point where, technically speaking, had it not been for their preconceived image of how they expect for someone to be their companion and their mentality of believing that, our ghetto-fied black, this, that, and the other has no possible way of being a power couple, being expressive. People are like, if I'm making six figures, I don't want no man who's a mechanic or this, that, and the other. And yet, lots of other people, of other colors and stuff, that's perfect. As long as you got the right partnership, you can do that. But, the image and the stigma that now has caused a lot of our upper metaphysical adults today who've gone through the HBCUs and gone through the stars and the Masons and the Elks and all this other stuff and the pomp and circumstances and all this other stuff like that, blackity muckety mucks and boulets and stuff like that, has now caused them the inability to be able to believe and to see and to invest in people for their content of their character and not the color of their ghetto, and not realize that, the one thing that people of color, black folks, are unequipped to be able to handle is, one of the things that I've admired about white folks, cool white folks, is that, yes, they can get a haircut and put on a suit and this, that, and the other, and you'd never know. And for most people, they would never know, just for the mere fact that they can't even see the caliber of the quality of what they're even wearing. All they see is, oh, he's wearing a suit. I'm like, no, man, he's wearing a JCPenney suit. That ain't no Hugo Boss suit. Oh, yeah, he's wearing loafers. He ain't wearing no, no good shoes, this, that, and the other. And we as people of color have been so ill prepared for the understanding of what class and level and content and character is, that we're incapable. All we know is that we want a roughneck. Got to have a roughneck. We want a man that takes care of us. We wanted this, that, and the other. And so they want to complain because they got these F-boys and, and these simps and this, that, and the other. And yet, those are the only people that will comply. They have no other idea. And then it gets into even more of the more difficult thing, because now everybody wants to sneak and try to be, like closet swingers or closet BDSM or closet, side pieces or this, that, and the other, without the understanding that there's no closet in this. You just have to step your game up and basically allow this to enhance you. And therefore, poly is still a no-no to the majority of the people who are basically living in these so-called serial monogamous relationships, where they're kind of grandfathered into the displeasure of knowing that they're, the only thing that would qualify them as poly is transparency, honesty, conviction and purpose. And they can't handle that. And yet, it takes a village. Many of us were ill-equipped. We were not told, that while Papa was a Rolling Stone, Papa took care of a lot of people, and he was a good man. And that's something that was lost in the sauce when they tried to just say, oh, you just trying to put it this way and that way. No, we didn't just go stick mitten and run. We took care of, raised more than one family. We raised a community. And none of these adults now, and most of these adults now can't quite understand that. And for that reason, us as people of color are really losing out on a lot of what all the other people we envy, struggle to get to that level too. And therefore, I find it kind of awkward, when I sit here as a single person in my crib in DC, unpartnered, not due to the mere fact that I can't find somebody to get with, but that I can't really honestly see anyone that's actually capable of identifying the pedigree into which exists past all of the outside crusty exterior that exists, and yet be also capable of enhancing my evolution as we go. People want to get together and get married, but they don't want to get together and be partners. They don't want to actually enhance each other. They're not trying to do that. They think that they're trying to do that, and the only enhancement they want is for them to keep their hands off of somebody, or to be a good person, or to do what I say, or things of that nature. And it's gotten really bad. It's gotten really bad that it's impossible for us to actually be able to entertain, educate, enlighten our own people, just due to the mere fact that they believe that they are privileged to be able to deserve what they want, how they want it. And that's not the way this works, and yet, it never boggles the mind more than it does when I see a lot of these broadcasts and whatnot, like my man Kevin, to sit back there and he's like, so on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you call yourself? I think I'm a 6, maybe an 8, really. Well, how tall are you? How much do you weigh? What size dress you wear? How much do you make? Well, I make about 6 figures or something. I do okay, and this, that, and the other. And okay. So what are you looking for? I'm looking for someone who can, this, that, and the other. And they're going, well, where are you at? Well, I'm over here in the uppity, this, that, and the other. He's like, well, first off, you just can't sit where you are in your, well, I got all the nice things and expect for, Mr. Perfect to show up. You got to travel. A lot of us don't even seem to understand that. They want something, but they don't want to go out and get it. They don't want to understand that the type of people that you might want don't even exist in the area that you need to be at. You need to go somewhere else where people are more to the level into which you seek. And yet nobody really wants to do that. I don't want to, I'm not thinking about moving. I don't want to this, that, and the other. And you're going, but rich people, they got places everywhere. Why can't you, do the same? Oh, no, man, I'm too busy trying to put more stuff in my own house. And it's been so difficult to try to explain this to people. And I know I've gone a little long in this little thing, and I got chicken in the oven that's probably about to get real crunchy if I don't get to it. So tell you what, this is WNDC. WNDC NDC. WNDC stands for We in the Crib and You Ain't. Now, I never professed to be a 9 or a 10 or a 5 or anything of that nature. I don't like looking down at people. I really honestly wish that I could honestly just, treat and see people. But I'm no bottom feeder. And one of the most difficult things as a person I am is trying to explain to people who would see me in this doggone broadcast right now and say, Negro, please, look at you. Who would want you? And yet any man who would say that they're looking for a woman with class and style, would find themselves in a conflict, if they actually said, yeah, you cute, you fine, you this, that, and the other, but you ain't got no home training. You ain't got no training for, you ain't got no mansion training. You know, you can have home training, but it just really shouldn't be this difficult for many more of you to look at yourselves and understand that even as you consist in your balling out of control self, one of the things that's been keeping our people down as a class of people is the mere fact that our aspirations are just way too low. Oh yeah, I want a Lambo, and yet what are you gonna put with it? Why would you want one? I mean, these things are things that you just don't get because they're just something to have and ooh ah. We don't think like we want to be rich. We don't think like these things. We don't understand and respect the sanctity of commitment and the partnership. We don't understand that as you grow and get rich, you are privileged to a lot of the other temptations and whatnot that a lot of broke folks don't need to be doing, but it also comes with the responsibility. Kind of like that dude Dexter, and how he's trying to get back with his wife. That poor child, she is ill-equipped. There's no debutante in that one right now. She's not a public speaker, and she really honestly needs some help, and he's not helping her. He's back in his car talking while she's out here trying to do her thing by herself, and that's a shame. That child deserves better. Somebody needs to get her Oprah, somebody like that, and teach her how to be more powerful and proficient and speaking and understanding these things. Just don't be sitting around there, and by the power of Jesus, and this, that, the other, and so and so. You could talk all of that you want to, but you're not walking it because you're still just talking it. People don't have to hear what you say you're going to do. They can see it. And right now, ain't nobody seeing it. And that's the same thing that a lot of these people who got it all these sisters, the worst thing that they could have probably done for a lot of our own women is give them too much for them to be able to see any value in someone who don't need to make that to make them happy. This is WNDC. WNDC stands for We in the Crib and You Ain't NDC. And I'm done. I'm hungry. You good?